Okay, good morning. With everybody.
And we still say that.
Okay, good morning.
Morning, everyone.
So we are in just finishing up Hemshech Tzadik Daled, page 114. I'm going to go back to Ayin Beis today. We'll just read one summary, but before I do that, let me just sum up where we are. So we're basically going back and forth, Ayin Beis, Tzadik Daled. So Ayin Beis, we're on page 1152 is where we stopped. Actually, no, my mistake. 1154, the end of the mimer. And then we went back to Tzadik Daled to review the same idea, which is what? Briefly, that though the ayin is the central and general word we use to describe the channel that serves as an interface between the Yesh Amiti, the absolute true reality, the creator, and the Yesh HaNivra, the created reality, yet that ayin, which divides into two, one representing the source, the other representing the product, has different meanings. From the point of view of the source, Yesh Amiti, so that's the true Yesh, and ayin is basically nothingness, as he said, insignificance, not teifus makim, even the highest level of oir. From the point of view, that's das elyon. From the point of view of das tachten, the perspective from the Yesh looking up, the Yesh is the created Yesh, and the ayin is the creative energy coming from the creator that infuses it and creates it and sustains it and so on. And their ayin means two things. One, that it's loy dovar. It's not made of the same substance. It exists, it's an existence. You can't call it completely non-existent, but it's not an existence as we define substance in our sensory and empirical tools. And the second reason is because it's a built-in musig, not comprehended. You can understand it. You can understand this entity. It's a mysterious force of entity. So on one hand, it manifests within the yesh, it's bislapshus, but it's concealed. And of course, the Aveda is to reveal it. But we're not talking about so much focused on that, even though he did make mention of it a few times. Right now, that's the distinction between. So we learned the same thing, the equivalent that we learned on pages 1150 through 1153, or 1152 in Ayin Beis. We learned here in Tzadik Daled, top of page 112 through the top of 114, basically, or the bottom of 113. Okay. So the only reason I'm still in Tzadik Daled is because the next mimer begins on page 114. If you want to follow the text again, ayinbeis.com has all the PDFs of all these texts. So now the Rebbe, Friedrich Rebbe, as customarily begins the next mimer Lech Lecha, Tzadik Daled, but then he says, if you look at the bottom, I'm going to skip the beginning of the mimer because it's not relevant at all to our discussion here, because that's the different hemshech. But you see, Lahavin Kozeh Yesh Lahagdim, he gives a summary of everything that was explained. So I might as well learn the summary in the Friedrich Rebbe's words. Then the summary ends on top of page 115, and there we shall return to Ayin Beis, the new mimer in Ayin Beis, the mimer 138, I believe. Well, we'll get to that in a minute. So let's just do the summary, which is essentially what I just said now, but in the Friedrich Rebbe's own words. So I'm reading at the bottom of 114. The paragraph starts with Lahavin Kol Zeh to the top of 115. She says, Lahavin Kol Zeh, which is the customary beginning of a mimer. That's a hemshech. He starts with a verse or a statement, asks questions, and says, to understand this, and goes back to the theme he was discussing previously, continues that theme till he ends the Maimer and says, and according to this, we'll understand the verse or the statement and the questions that were asked. Being that we're learning Ayin Beis, so we're seeing this every Maimer in Ayin Beis until the end of volume 2. Since we're not learning Tzadik Dalet, I'm not doing that with Tzadik Dalet. I'm only doing the central hemshech of the Maimer itself, not the beginnings and ends. We made an exception because the end of last Maimer had some more connected to the central theme. So he says, so he's summing up now what we've learned, the inyan, yesh, v'ayin, v'yesh. So there's the three general stages in the whole cosmic order and beyond, and the ayin in between, as we learn in a moment, splits into two. So, well, yesh arishin u'b'chinas yesh amiti. The first yesh is the true yesh, the true absolute reality of atzmus. V'hainu b'chinas atzmus ein sof shamiti siyesei yizbarach. This is the level of atzmus ein sof. Miti siyesei means the true reality, the true being. When you say something exists, hayes or heva, you're talking about the true reality. The yesh hasheni, on the other end of the spectrum, comes the yesh hasheni. Who yesh hamisava, the yesh hanivra. This is the yesh that's brought into being, and the yesh that is created. So it's not a miti sayesh, it's a created yesh, but it's a yesh. So he's really doing a summary of it all. And the ayin, this level of ayin, we call that stage, that channel, that field of energy, ayin, we know has different meanings. So basically the ayin is the interface between the two yesh. Yesh amiti, yesh hanivra. Va'ayin nechlak l'shnayim. And this ayin divides into two. You have to always remember the two levels of ayin are one ayin, they just have two parts to it, so to speak. One end relates to the top, one end relates to the bottom. But it's not called two levels of ayin until you first say it's ayin. And then the ayin divides into two states because they're both oyer. It's just a question whether it's etzem oyer, it's pashtus oyer, it's different interpretations. They're both oyer ein sof. They're both divine energy. Just the difference, what their focus and function is. Echad, b'chinas ha'ayin diyesh amiti. One is the ayin that relates to the creator, the source, the true yesh. Va'beza ayin diyesh ha'misava va'nivra. And the second is the yesh ha'misava va'nivra. As I pointed out, why does he say misava and nivra? Because nivra does not include netzal, emanation. Nisava includes everything that came into being, even etzem ha'er. All the levels of er is considered nisava. And nivra is specifically, when you break it down, it usually refers to bria and on, bria yesh ma'ayin. But he's concluding everything right now in this whole structure. Uba'ayin zeh, and in explaining this ayin, what level is it? Nizboyer gimel shittas. Three approaches were explained. He's summing up the three approaches. Echad, the ayin hu eir makif. The first is that the ayin is eir makif, which he means is eir before the tzimtzum. Hainu klolos eir sof shalifnei at tzimtzum, meaning the general, the infinite light, divine light before the pre-tzimtzum. Ha'ayin diyesh amiti etzem ha'er. So the first level of ayin is the etzem, the core energy. If you remember, is not revealed, it's not expressed. It's there only to reflect its source. Va'ayin diyesh ha'misava, page 115, his pashtus se'er. And the second level of ayin is the extension of air where the ratzon begins to emerge and the details, all before the tzimtzum. That's interpretation one. First approach. Second approach, Beis. Second approach, klolos ayin hu mebeis inyanov. The general ayin is from both inyanim. It's an interesting expression. It says the Rebbe adds a footnote here. Shel ha'ir. When the Frierdiker Rebbe says Beis Inyanov, the Rebbe is explaining Shel ha'ir, Because if you don't add that, what's in Beis and Yonav of what? Now the truth is, it's Shala Eir Shal Ispashtus Se'er B'Pashtus. But he doesn't say that. He says Shala Eir, two Inyanim in the Eir. And he cites chapter 19. Because in chapter 19 is when he explained the second approach. Let me look there just to make sure that we're on the same clarity. Yeah, second Shita. We could discuss further what the Rebbe is coming to add. You could also say he wants to make clear that it's not the etzem, it's only Eir. Really go back to chapter 19 to really fully understand. So what are the Beis and Yonav Shala Eir? The Ayin Yesh Hamiti, interpretation 2, second approach. That the Ayin of Yesh Hamiti who klolos Eir Shalifnei Tzimtzum. Now, the first level of Ayin is the general Eir Lifnei Tzimtzum. Before, both levels of Ayin were Lifnei Tzimtzum. Now he's in the second approach, only the first level is Lifnei Tzimtzum. Who? The Yesh HaMesav HaNivru Eir HaKav. I'm sorry. The close Eir Lifnei Tzimtzum. Sorry. Va'ayin, the Yesh HaMesav HaNivra, the second level of Ayin, of the Yesh that is brought into being and created, that's the Eir HaKav. It's the light of the Kav, which of course is after the Tzimtzum. But there, remember, that itself he explained then, and in general, it's not just two levels of the Lifnei Tzimtzum and the Seviv and the Kav, but the general two levels of Seviv Kalam and Mamala Kalam. That's approach number 2. Va'gimel, and the third approach, the klolos ayin hu er pnimi. The general ayin is er pnimi, immanent energy. Ha'ayin yesh hamiti hu etzem ha'er. The ayin of the yesh hamiti is the core of er pnimi. Va'ayin yesh ha'mesav v'anivru is pastus ha'er. And the ayin of the yesh that comes into being, and the created yesh is the extension of er. So there you have three different, both in interpretation 1, they're both before the Tzimtzum, Etzem Eir is Pashtus Eir before the Tzimtzum. The second is like before the Tzimtzum and Mamala after, or generally Seviv Mamala. And the third is both Mamala, Etzem and Pashtus of the imminent Eir Mamala. No Chadushim here, he just summed up what we learned. Yeah. Then he says, "V'zeu ki keil deus havaya," and this is the statement in Shmuel. The ki keil deus havaya. The God knows deus is made up of deus, 2 deus. Beis hadeus, the das elyon, v'das tachten. So what pashas mean God knows everything, but the word that says deus lashon rabim, double 2. So 1 is the Das Elyon, the perspective from above. The Das Tach, the perspective from below. Das HaMashpia, the Das HaMakabel. The perspective or perception of the transmitter and the perspective or perception of the recipient. Okay. We're now returning to Ayin Beis. And then we shall go back here how the Frierdiker Rebbe explains Ayin Beis, because now he's going further into the theme of the Das Elyon and Das Tachten. Based on what we've learned now, Das Elyon and Das Tachten is what? One is connected to the Eir that reflects the core, the essence, the source, and one is connected to the Eir, the Das Tachten, the perspective of the Makabel, meaning the Yesh, how the Yesh looks at it. So one is the perspective of the Yesh Amiti, and one is the perspective of the Yesh HaNivra. I should correct myself. He's going to now go deeper and more subtle into this. But because the Seder in Ayin Beis starts with a mimer, a new mimer, so first we'll learn the beginning of the mimer, But just bear in mind that flow is going to come from here, but the Rebbe Rashab is also going to do a Yesh Lahagdim shortly. So we'll see the Frieda Rebbe Rashab summary as well. So I'm opening up Ayin Beis now, page 1154. So I hope you're following. So now, 1154, it's a new Maimer, Shabbos Shuva Maimer. So you see, B'Seyayta D'Shmaya, with God's help, Shabbos Shuva, Rebbe Rashab wrote it out. Ayin Tes Tov Reish Vov. That's Tov Reish Ayin Vov. That's Shabbos Shuva Tov Reish Ayin Vov, which would be the equivalent of the year 5676. And in English, the Gregorian date would have been, since it's Shabbos Shuva, it'd still be 1915. So this is now Maimer 138. Yeah.
In Pshat, why not Tov Reish Ayin Vov? Why Ayin Tov Reish Vov?
Seems like he uses that the whole time. Not sure. Maybe it's the Miram is Eter, Etru, like a Torah, Mitavov.
No, not a Torah. Maybe Itru, like Bakosher, like Eser is a Bakosher of Nafshis. Itru.
Maybe.
Even though the Tov Reish Ayin Vov is Tiru, but Itru, Shabbos Shuva,
Well,
maybe it's
definitely doesn't want to use Tiru because of the word Ra. Like also, you see by Tov Reish Ayin Hey, he did not write Tov Reish Ayin Hey, he wrote Heter. So I think the main reason is he doesn't want to use the word with the Sheirish Reish Ayin.
even though the Tiru means you should be a shepherd, you should.
Okay, but pastors, that's the reason. They never use, like, Tov Reish Sadiches is Chatzeres or Tirchatz, never the word, because it's Reish Sadiches. But if you look by Heter, he never uses Reish Ayin Hey. That's common. And therefore, I think Reish Ayin Vov, he doesn't want to use Reish Ayin in that order. That's Bapashtus. But Pale, he uses Tir, so it could be what you're saying. It could be that's the meaning. But I think it starts with he didn't want to use that tziruf.
It doesn't mean he's giving us a bracha. We should all be rich. Isru, Aramaic, wealth.
Why not?
Yep.
Why not? I'm not against it.
Everyone agrees for this bracha.
Right.
Good one, Yafi.
Yeah. Okay. So let's continue. So now the Maimer's Shabbos Shuva that year. So we're talking now 106 years ago. So the Maimer goes like this. So it's a Shabbos Shuva Maimer. So he's using a posuk, obviously, that's connected to Shabbos Shuva. So Anoichi double. I forgive. I erase your sins, lemani, on my behalf. So he's going to Pirush lemani, leman shmei yizbarach. Leman, in other words, God's blessed name. U'kamosha Pirush Rashi, loy b'schuscha u'b'tzitkes avizecha. Rashi says, I'm not doing it in your merit, I'm doing it on my behalf, for my sake. Not in your merit, and not b'tzitkes avizecha, the merit or the tzedakah, the kindness of your ancestors or fathers. So Rebbe Rashab asks, what's lamani? What does it mean? What does it mean God's doing it for his behalf? We need the sins erased. What is God getting from this? Don't Razal say, Ma ichpes le'lakosh baruch hu im shechet min ha'erev v'shechet min ha'tzavar. Why does God care? An example, the Maimer Chazal is if you shecht from the back or you shecht from the throat. Like shchita has to be dafke, not the back. You don't shecht the back of the neck of an animal. You shecht the front of the neck. So what difference does it make to him? Now we learned this, the holy Aveda Tzedek Gevei. Does God care about the Aveda? But here you're saying befedish lamani, on my behalf. as if it's like it's negated to God, that these sins should disappear, should be erased. Umikra mole dibra kosev, and the pasuk is filled with a statement, it's an expression, mikre mole dibra kosev, that the pasuk speaks many times. Means it's not a one-time statement, it's a common statement. Im chatasa matifel. If you sin, matifel, what impact does it have on God? V'rabu pusha'echa. What difference does it make, the many sins you may have? Im tzedakta matitanle. If you do charity or you're kind and virtuous, what do you already contribute to him? What are you giving him? Oima miyot chatikach. What does he need to take from your hand? What is ma miyot chatikach? Like, what do you have to offer God? God is what?
Yikach.
I'm sorry, yikach. I misread. Okay. So we have here the one Maimer Chazal and the Posuk that says clearly that God doesn't need, is, I don't know, indifferent, he's aloof, he's removed from our. So what's the Pshat? Lamani, Laman Shmei Yisbarach, that this is being done, Laman God, for God, on God's behalf. Okay, that's question number one. Next question. Ayin Beis. Why does it say anechi anechi twice? The b'matan Torah ksiv pamachas anechi. Matan Torah it says once. Anechi Hashem Elokecha. The kan number Beis pamim anechi. Because Matan Torah, of course, is such a prominent and once in history event. There it only says once anechi, and here it says twice anechi. So it really grabs your attention immediately. Why does it say twice? Okay, so those are the two questions. The Lamani and the twice Anoichi. Yeah. Now listen, you're allowed, if you're allowed to peek to the end of the mimer if you're very curious.
Yes, the Anochi is about the reflects on the Haftorah. It says Anochi, who.
That's the pasuk, yeah.
Yeah, so that's what he's reflecting. Okay, I just want to get straight.
Twice Anochi, yeah. Ulahav and Zeh, now comes the Rebbe Rashab's Lahav and Zeh Yesh Lahagdim. So Rebbe Rashab is going to say to understand this, one has to preface Mashin is Baralil, what was discussed earlier, Be'inyan Yesh Vayin V'yesh.
Can we ask a question that from before this, from the first line?
Go ahead.
Okay, why do we know that Mani is Shmei? I see the Rashi says that, but what's the tie-in?
Lamani, the pasuk says. Why does the pasuk say Lamani? It should have just said Humoicha Pshecha. He erases your sins. The extra word Lamani means on my behalf. It's pshat. It's not an interpretation.
But Shmei.
Lamani means on my behalf, on behalf of my name, on my sake. Shmoi is not. There's no diuk in the word Shmoi. Shmoi simply means, like you say, Kiddush Hashem. You basically talk on God's behalf. So it's Shmoi is Baruch. I don't know if there's any particular diuk in the word Shmoi here. Could have said Hu is Baruch, but very often the expression in Hebrew is Hu Shmoi is Baruch. Baruch Hu, Baruch Shmoi type of thing.
Okay.
I don't know if there's a diuk in the word Shmoi. Maybe at the end of the Maimer he'll say something. Okay.
Okay. Thanks.
To understand this, we preface. One has to preface what was explained earlier. Be'inyan yesh ayin v'yesh. Very similar, I see, as the Rebbe, the Frierdiker Rebbe, probably cites this. Be'inyan yesh v'ayin v'yesh. Yeah. Now watch. Hayesh harishin. The first yesh hu bechinas yesh amiti. It's actually word for word. Actually, now that I realize. As the Bechina Yesh Amiti, the true reality behind the Bechinas Atzmas Ein Sof Shu Amiti Seyesi is Baruch. Okay, it's interesting. Mamish word for word. The true reality, Atzmus Ein Sof. The Yesh Hasheni, and the second Yesh is what? The second Yesh is Hu hayesh hanivra. Doesn't use the word mesava, by the way. The Frierdiker Rebbe adds the word hayesh hamesava and hanivra. Here, just yesh hanivra. He's
He
not
also
going into distinguishing. So he just says the created yesh.
He also changes the spelling of emitis to emitas.
Okay. Yeah. Amitis, and he says amitis. Yeah. Frierdiker Rebbe does change things like that from time to time. I don't know what the diuk is exactly, to be honest. Maybe it's more precise, maybe more like the Lashon HaRambam. Ma'amitis himosei nimtzu kol nimtzoyim. But the teichen is the same. I don't think there's a distinction in the content. Okay. Va'ayin hu mamutze b'neim. And the ayin is the interface between them. Va'ayin nechlach l'shnayim. The ayin divides into two. I'm not going to explain because I said it already a number of times. B'chinas ayin shel yesh amiti. The ayin that relates to the source, the yesh amiti, atzmus, the creator, the true yesh, true mitzias. Va'beis, va'ayin shel yesh nivra. And the ayin that relates to the yesh nivra, the created yesh. The Frierdiker Rebbe add the three approaches. The Rebbe Rashab does not. The Rebbe Rashab jumps immediately to the two meanings in the word ayin, which the Frierdiker Rebbe does not directly say. Okay. The ima yesha shneim nikra ayin, and even though both these levels are called ayin, ein pirusham shava. Their meaning is not dissimilar, is not the same. The legabi yesh amiti, from the perspective or in context of the yesh amiti, the true yesh, the source, Pirish ayin, page 1155. Shu ayin ve'efes mamish legaba atzmus. The ayin there means ayin ve'efes mamish, absolute insignificance, ayin, like zilch, nothing, compared legabe ha'atzmus. Well, legabe yesh hanivre, ein zeh shu b'chinas ayin mamish. The ayin of the, compared to the yesh hanivre, from the perspective of the created yesh, you cannot say it's ayin mamish, as non-existent, as in completely insignificant, as we discussed at length, relatively. Rakshanikra ayin, so why is it called ayin then? Al shem shuloi dover, kamoy hayesh. Shu b'chinas mitzias dover mamish. It's coming to say it's not like a dover, like an object, like an item, like a substance, like ingredient. Like the mitzias dover mamish, the yesh, which is a mitzias dover mamish, from our perspective, you say something as actual, substantial, concrete. I mean, you can give a lot of words for it, but basically something on our terms called a yesh, you can't call the ayin of the yesh hanivra yesh. So you call it ayin. It's not yesh, basically saying it's not like the yesh that it creates. The gam nikra ayin, and the second reason, it's also called ayin al shem she'ena musig b'nivrayim, due to the fact that it's not comprehended in the creation or by the creations or the creatures. Not understood. Okay. So that's the summary. So again, nothing really, we have nothing, no new revelations here. It's really summing up what was learned. So let's continue. Now starts another so-called sub-chapter in the sugya of yesh, ayin, and yesh. So we've learned a lot of things about it so far. We learned the three levels. The ayin divides into two, the three interpretations. And the ayin means different things from the perspective from above and perspective from below. Now the Rebbe Rashab continues. This is the new paragraph on page 1155. Okay? As I said, once we've finished the next section here, we'll go back to Tzadik Daled and see how the Rebbe Frierdiker Rebbe elaborates. And there's a lot more elaboration on this section. Yeah. Okay. Omnom Mashakosov Kel Deis Havaya. You say Kel Deis Havaya, till now, we understood Das Elyon and Das Tachten in a certain way. Das Elyon is a perspective of God from above. But what was Das Tachten? Whose perspective is Das Tachten? The Nivra's perspective. That the Yesh Ham Nivra, its perspective is that it is the Yesh. Above it is some Ayin, is an Ayin, which for two reasons is called Ayin. But when you read the Pasuk, it doesn't say that. The Pasuk says, Kel Deis Havaya, that God has two perspectives. That's what he's going to explain now. Habeis Deis and Belukus Gufe. Both the perspectives are in godliness itself. If it would have said Kel Deya Havaya, the Deya B'nei Adam, it'd be one thing. Deis is said on both on Havaya, on the Eibishter. V'hainu ba'ayin atzmei hu habeis Deis the Das Elyon v'das Tachten. In other words, it's not. It's when you look closer, it's not just the perspective of the Yesh. In the Ayin itself, which is both a Lakus, the Ayin of the Yesh HaNivra, the Ayin of the Yesh HaMisaveh, or Nivra. I'm sorry, the Ayin of the Yesh HaMiti, and the Ayin of the Yesh HaNivra, in the Ayin itself, there's two perspectives. In other words, it's not the perspective of the Yesh HaMiti and the Yesh HaNivra, it's the perspective of the Ayin HaMiti and the Ayin of the Yesh HaNivra. That's what he's now breaking it down further. Now, obviously, this is not a contradiction. He's not slugging up. He's not saying everything we said now is incorrect, because as we'll see, it's connected. But when you look closer into the words, you have to say that the two perspectives are in Elokus itself, which is only going to sharpen and crystallize the interface. Because you're going to see in godliness itself, no matter what interpretation in Ayin, the first interpretation, the second or the third, that in godliness itself, there's two perspectives. So the Eibishter has a Das Tachten and the Eibishter has a Das Elyon. And these are two Deis in Havaya, Kel Deis Havaya. That's what he's going to now explain.
It's actually easier to envision an interface or mamutza that stays in one dimension rather than going all the way through. It's very hard to understand that.
But as you'll see, they enrich each other, because at the end of the day, the Ayin of the Yesh HaNivra helps us, the Yesh, have a perspective in the Ayin as well. But yes, but more precise right now, he's speaking how it is in a Lukus, and that's going to be carried over to the Das Tachten of the Yesh HaNivra as well. So he's not contradicting, as I just said. But yes, good point. Okay. So now he's going to explain this. The Das Elyon, the perspective from above, hu ba'ir kameshenimshach min ha'atzmus. So the perspective from above is now not atzmus. It's the oir that nimshach min ha'atzmus. Shu b'chinas ayin be'etzem husei. Remember that interpretation of ayin was be'etzem husei. It's not just ayin relative to the yesh, as it is the second level of ayin. Relative to us, it's either non-existent or not a substance or not understood. But now we're talking about an ayin that be'etzem husei is bittul, completely nullified. And that's where that level of ayin, in other words, the higher level of ayin, has a perspective. That's called Das Elyon. The loirak is going to spell it out. Loirak, it's not only like we learned earlier, Masha atzmus roya oisei la'ayin. This is very heavy stuff right now. Listen to this line here. It's not just that atzmus sees it as nothing, because atzmus is amitis imotze, we learned, is a true reality. So obviously anything that's not atzmus is completely insignificant compared to a built-in metzias nimtza, compared to a mechuyev metzias, but compared to metziusim atzmusei, everything is creation. God is the only thing that is true reality. So obviously everything from that perspective is a mere reflection, meaning doesn't have any real significance. But he's saying now that perspective, the Ur also has, not just Atzmus has it. The Ur itself is in a state like that. It feels nothingness. It doesn't feel itself in any way. So you see how important this is, because he's giving now a Metzias Nimtza. To say that Atzma was built to Metzias Nimtza sees that he is the only reality and everything else is bottle, my Kamash Malan, you can even say. Obviously, that's the case. We still have to say it. But now he's saying that even in Metzias Nimtza, even in existence as we will relate to an existent reality, there is a state called the Oyer, Atzmi, the highest level of Oyer, or he doesn't say Atzmi here, just says the Ayin of the Yesh Amiti. Also, Ba'atzme feels that it's Ayin. Basically, it's completely antithetical to what we consider to be when we have a sense of identity. So it's considered Ayin Ba'atzme, She'ein B'chinas Tfisas Smokim Ba'atzme Klal. Till now, we were talking, it was not Tefes Smokim compared to Atzmus. Now he says this Eid in itself feels absolutely no standing. It has no standing. I know you could ask the question, 1 second, maybe God wants it to have standing. The fact that God made it means he wants to have it. Yes, but he wants a state that is a Metzias Nimtza that has no standing because he wants to introduce real bittul into existence. That Atzmus has bittul, that sees everything bottle, it's one thing. He wants to introduce utter and total bittul. So basically the higher level of Ayin, of the Yesh Amiti, is going to introduce to us, meaning to us, to Metzias Nimtza, to existence, a state of utter bittul, which is a tremendous chiddush. Because you could say, you know what, compared to Atzmus, it's bottle, but compared to itself, what do you mean? It's Etzem Ha'er. It's the highest level of Ha'er. It should be very proud and should have a very strong sense of identity. We're not talking about, obviously, arrogance or anything that is an identity that's outside of Atzmus. But it should be very proud. You know, I am appointed by Atzmus to share and to reflect what Atzmus is to all of existence. Everything is going to come through the Oyer. No, that's not the case. The Oyer in its highest levels is completely bittul, does not have any sense of self. That's what he's saying right now.
You're interpreting Tfisas Mokim standing?
You could say insignificance, you could say value, you can say standing. I mean, I don't have a perfect word, to be honest. Basically, Ein Tefes Mokim Klaus. You have to say no standing. What I mean by that, not that it exists and it's not valuable. It it doesn't have any, only Atzmus matters. The Eir does not have any value, significance. Look, if somebody has a better word, great. English ultimately is limited. I used all words. I use significance, value, standing. What?
Is existence is the right word? No existence?
But Tfisas Mokim doesn't mean no existence. Tfisas Mokim means it has no value. It means it has no, it's Nishtei for Mokim. Then you should say, yeah, you could also say it doesn't exist, but first of all, it does exist. I don't know if you can say it doesn't exist. It's a Metzias Nimtza. You could only say its whole existence is only to reflect Atzmus. That's what you could say.
No intrinsic value from it.
Well, I think we have to understand it from the point of view of like an Aveda, by a process of elimination. Look at us, you and I, right? We are not in a state of Ein Tfisas Mokim, correct? Even if we don't have, even if we have low self-esteem, or we don't have any, we don't think we're very important, but you cannot say that you completely have no standing. You have no ego at all, no sense of self, no self-consciousness. I mean, that doesn't exist. A yesh, by definition, has a certain sense of conscious. It's conscious of itself. I mean, the mere fact, you're hungry, that means you're feeling hungry. There's an I that's feeling hungry. I'm not talking about yeshes in Klippa and Lu'umazeh. You know, yeshes that is a yesh and doesn't give room for anybody else. Just the mere fact that we exist. We exist with the consciousness. We're conscious of ourselves, of our feelings, of other people's feelings. So to really understand Ayin Amiti is not easy, because we could understand Bittul Hayesh. You could say, you know what? Even though I'm conscious, yesterday was Yom Kippur, I'm told not to eat, even though I'm hungry, I'm going to ignore my needs. So that we could understand. I'm going to ignore my needs. I'm going to overlook them. So let's go even deeper. You won't even feel you have needs. You can even reach a level of that. You're completely dedicated to the cause. You're on a shlichus, the Rebbe sends you somewhere. You have something to do. You're not thinking about yourself at all. You're busy doing what you have to do. Can you call that ayin mamish? No. You could say at that moment, you're not focused on yourself. You're not conscious of yourself. But the self is still there and easy to access. And even when you're doing something that's completely dedicated, a complete mitzvah, completely dedicated, kulei la'Hashem, you cannot call this ayin ve'efes mamish, in a tefus malkim klal ba'atzmei. So the point I'm making here is the only way to really understand an ayin is to go through a process, as I said, of elimination. You start with us, yourself. You say, okay, as much as I negate myself, I'm not even talking now whether you could do it, hypothetically. A person completely says, like we hear about Chassidim, they didn't think about themselves at all, nothing. To the point that when you looked at them, you saw certain things, you couldn't believe how they completely didn't even feel their own needs. But still, as much as you go, at the end of the day, it's very high levels of bitl hayesh. Bitl b'mitzias, we can talk about, but there you have to really get to a point where you talk, let's say, the ovis hein hamarkava, that 24/7, all they are is a chariot, a vehicle for godliness. It's we could talk about it, put it on paper, but it's almost unfathomable to be there. As I said, we can talk about it. And that's not even the highest levels of bitl and ayin. What we're going to enter now in the next few pages, in Ayin Beis and in Tzadik Dalet, actually more than a few pages, is going to be different levels of bitl that the Oyer carries and teaches us. So what I would suggest, and one way to understand it a little easier, is the Rebbe's sichos about shlichus. So we know the Rebbe brings from Yosef Engel and from other Sfarim that in shlichus there's different levels. Pushed al pi halacha. And even though it initially starts with 3 levels, the Rebbe enumerates 5 levels, where the first level is just your shliach, you're just the maisa hashliach. Someone says, here's a shliach, you're my shliach for kedushin. So your hand becomes like shluchah shlodin kamese, but your whole being is not his shliach. He hasn't given you power of attorney over everything. So your hand is like an extension of the hand. Halacha says that if someone appoints you a shliach and you accept and you follow his instructions, your hand at the time that you give it to the woman who he's being mekadesh, it's as if he's doing it and you're invisible. But that's not total bittul. That's the bittul of your hand during the maisa. A second later, it's over. Then the Rebbe talks more than that the whole person becomes. And then but it's still a shliach, till the point that the shliach becomes like one with the mishalech. I'm not going to go through all the levels right now. We need to look in the sichos. But the Rebbe talks about these levels to the point where it's no longer you. It's only the mishalech. You don't exist. All you are is an extension of the mishalech completely. And it's how the mishalech sees you as an extension.
Where is it? In which chelak is this?
What? One second. What?
In which chelak is this? The sicha.
All the sichos and shlichus zeichen to it. Go to any sich on shlichus, you'll go to one, they'll give you the Mara Mekamis to the others. You can start off with Chayesara Mem Zayin if you wish. It's so many. I mean, the Chayesara Mem Zayin, there's a letter from the Rebbe Chafov Tavshin Mem Aleph. You have a Kuntres HaShlichus or Sefer HaShlichus. The Rebbe gave out for the Shluchim. Any sich on shlichus, or look up in the Mafteches, in the index on shlichus, and you'll find plenty for it. But I will, when we go deeper into this, I'll show you this levels of shlichus. It makes it easier to understand. Obviously, the highest level that we're talking about here is the hardest to understand, but you have to think of it in terms of an existence. We're going to learn inside. This is not stopped. It's just beginning. An existence is there, but there's nothing there but Atzmus reflected through it. And that's what it knows. That's all it is. The Eir, all it knows is that it's a reflection of Atzmus. And therefore, no tfisas.
This is what the Gemara said about Rashbi, and this is what the Rebbe said about the Friedrich Rebbe. He said it by the Shiva that the Friedrich Rebbe is also the Atzmus that was nislabish and aguf basar adam. And in the Gemara said that the Rashbi is Hashem Elokei
Man
Yisrael.
pnei odin Hashem darashbi. That's what you're referring to, right?
Is that
Mhm.
highest level called Bittul Ayesh or Bittul Mitzias? That highest level. And you skipped to the highest level.
The highest level is higher than bittul mitzias even, because it's not even mitzias that's bottle. It's initially never existent in a certain way. Anyway, I would wait till we learn it more. I just wanted to point out that we're talking about very high levels of bittul, and I will try to give examples for each one as we go along. And you're going to see, he's going to now explain, if you want a little, since we're, I'll just give you an overview and then we'll stop here. He's going to explain four efanim in bittul of the oir. Four efanim, four ways. It's Tzadik Daled only goes through three of them because that's when the Frierdiker Rebbe ends it. He ended the Hemshech, as I mentioned to you, because people complained that it was too deep, or one person complained. But the Rebbe Rashab will go through four dargis of bittul and oir. That's what we're going to be learning now. The Rebbe
How did
in
you say
Tofshin-
the Rebbe respond to this person? You told us once that the Rebbe respond to this person.
He was very upset at him. He said to him, "You know what? It's too deep for you. You don't have to come." But what's Mishnah in the Rebbe's in Yonim? There's the Rebbe saying my morim for the Welt, not for you. The Frierdiker Rebbe also commented
Yet he listened to him and he stopped. I mean, I don't understand that.
because the Frierdiker Rebbe probably saw that it was one person, so he saw it as a kitrug on it. That maybe the time has not come to reveal this. I don't know. I can't speak for the Frierdiker Rebbe, but he did stop. So
What
the
was the
Frierdiker Rebbe stops
response
after
to
three.
Frierdiker Rebbe? How did the
What?
Frierdiker Rebbe comment on that?
The Frierdiker Rebbe said, "Me will geben avonim teves und margolius und sie willen Zuckerkes." The Frierdiker Rebbe said, "I want to give precious stones, and they want candies." That's
Wow.
what he said.
Wow.
Now, can imagine the Frierdiker Rebbe's maimorim that are not Tzadik Daled are not exactly candies, but lefiyerech, this stuff, it's it's lighter, let's say. Now, what's that interesting thing? And Reb Shlomo, you mentioned it in Tafshin Tezvav. The Rebbe also explained these four levels in the maimorim of Yitzchak Kislev, I think.
I'm looking where this is. I saw it one time. It is so overwhelming. He's
Okay, but
saying
no.
about all
It's not
the
overwhelming once you learn Ayin Beis. Ayin Beis is more overwhelming. The Rebbe spoke about it, I think, in Tafshin Tezvav, 1955. I have to look it up. And the Rebbe said then, four levels, and everybody, no one had Ayin Beis then. So they thought that the Rebbe was Machadish, a fourth level over Tzadik Daled, because Tzadik Daled only has three levels. The Rebbe brings a fourth level. But then when Ayin Beis came out, we saw that the Rebbe took the fourth level from Ayin Beis. Just for the record. We'll
Reb
get to
Simon,
that.
if you could show me where this is, I'm looking for it. I saw it, and then I'm looking and I cannot find it.
Look at the Kislev Tezvav. I think there, or maybe is it Tishri?
Thank you. It's a maimel.
It's two Maimorim.
Thank you.
I'll look it up. I'll look it up later. I'll tell you tomorrow. Bottom line is, we'll stop here. He's going to now go into levels of bittul of the oir, and good. This is vital because ultimately we want to learn about bittul and be able to assume it in our lives. So these levels are all relevant to us. Now you may recall that back in volume 1, in the Shvuas Ayin Gimel Maimer, second section, the second half of Ayin Beis, volume 1, he said that there's two types of energy, Er HaBligvul and Er HaGvul, which was like the Er of the Spheres and the Er of Keser. And he says the Er HaBligvul, its inyan is to create bittul in existence. Er HaGvul inyan is to create existence. So the concept that Er brings bittul to the world, we've learned. But now, in a way, he's going back to some of the themes that we've learned throughout the Hemshech in the elements of bittul, which is, of course, vital to the whole discussion of transforming the tzimtzum into oir. You're transforming the tzimtzum, and that is through bittul. So listen, we've gone through pretty heavy stuff so far. We'll have some more. You can buckle your seatbelts and it'll be a nice journey. So we'll stop here, beginning of basically.
Buckle your seatbelt. Buckle your seatbelt and buckle.
Okay, buckle them again. And we're going to learn this, and we are going to, we'll go through it. Be patient. If you didn't know about this bittul till now, you can wait another day, and then you'll find out, and then you're going to become irresponsible. You're going to be responsible to achieve these levels of bittul.
And this
We get a time limit.
wasn't in this generation the question wasn't asked, or they learned it so deeply that they understood that they couldn't go, and we just more superficial, or is it because the generation in any sense is getting better?
The Rebbe is saying that in this generation, a Maimer Vatet Tzave, it shayches to everyone. I don't know if exactly like that, but you are a chassid of the Rebbe, so it shayches to you.
Correct. And I would say further than that, it goes both ways. There's the paradox. On one hand, individually, we may be on a lower level, but collectively, and based on the fact that we're standing on shoulders of giants, remember their avoid of bittul, which they went through very heavy bittul, it also we've inherited it. We benefit from it, but that still doesn't absolve us. We have our responsibility. I mean, at the end of the day, as I've always said, everybody relative to themselves. The key here is not just to chapim malachim. We're not trying to grab, trying to climb to heaven beyond us. We're trying to apply this, each of us, in their own way. If you told me that you learned this mamorim and it made one little shift in your life, how you treat your spouse or your children or other people, you've done what he wants you to do. We don't have to think of in terms that you have to go to Lifnei Tzimtzum all the way to Etzem Ha'er. You have to find Lifnei Erech relative to where you are. Based on this, a little shift I can make. That's where Aveda takes place in shifts, not in quantum leaps and in and giant steps. It's step by step by step. You stay consistent with that. That's how you grow in these matters. All this is a blueprint, but the Rebbe Rashab is laying out the blueprint for us to climb. Remember, we've been talking about there's the Hamshach, there's Mamayla Lamata, and then us going Mamata Lamayla. If Rosh Hashanah Yom Kippur mean anything in any serious way, it's this. It brings a little more bittul into your life and sustainable, not just for the day. That's the challenge. That's why you learn Chassidus. I mean, it's hard to imagine how someone can grow in bittul without learning this. Because you could have Kabbalah sale, but how much can you grow? You just stay Kabbalah sale. This is a true blueprint of growth. Where you learn at Yesh, Ayin, a higher level of Ayin, higher level. That's the essentially the formula. And it's doable if you just are humble and just try to apply it to where you are. That's what's asked for. I mean, sometimes you learn these mamorim, it becomes such high levels academically. Your head is in a daze from all these high levels. But when it comes to Aveda, it should be the other way around. It shouldn't be overwhelming. It should be, okay, so how do I apply what I learned to move a little shift, to move the needle, as they say. That is the ultimate goal. So Chassidus still pours it on. The Rebbe Rashab lets us have it on the highest levels here. He doesn't mince words and gives it on all levels. But you have to know, learning Haskalah and Aveda, you have to understand you have to be Makeres Mekeme. Understanding this doesn't mean you're there. It just means you understand it. Now that you understand it, question is, how do I apply it in my own being? Because we all have Lifnei Tzimtzum and La'achrat Tzimtzum within us. And we all have the three interpretations within us. Everything that we've learned is within us. So now the question is, how to identify where you're at? That to me is the greatest challenge, to be honest. To understand this, yes, it's a mental challenge and it's complicated, but that's more of a mind thing, understanding it and trying to comprehend to some extent. But the real place where it plays itself out is the Aveda. I mean, That's what it comes. That's ultimately the gift of Chassidus. I mean, nowhere do you get anything close to this. You know, when you learn this, you go back now, you learn a Rashi, a Rambam, a Gemara, a Medrash. You could see the undercurrent of it all is to bring bittul to Likus. But it's here, it spells it out in a real direct way. Without that, you can learn Rashi, you can learn Gemara and Rambam and everything and be a nice Jew and follow halacha. But you don't necessarily understand that this is a journey and a relationship with God, and every step and everything you learn and every mitzvah and every davening and every move is another step in the journey to say the Shtalshlus. This is like, I mean, what can I say? This is the greatest gift and treasure that Rabbeim gave us.
I must say that what you said, Erev Yom Kippur, was that you didn't record, unfortunately, really helped me yesterday, let me tell you.
Oh, we spoke about Samach Vav, you mean the whole, yeah. But Elam Haba, a taste of Lasad Love, yeah. No fear. Yeah. Okay, so we'll stop here, top of page 1155.